Steve Brown, our guest today, is a technology entrepreneur, a long-standing expert in artificial intelligence, and is an award-winning documentary filmmaker whose work explores how media and technology can really have a positive social impact. Steve is got an amazing background, which I can't cover in the time we have. He's founded several technology companies, one of which was acquired by Apple. He's also founded digital therapeutic companies and is an early pioneer of remote patient monitoring and chronic care management. So he is no stranger to healthcare and the use of technology in healthcare. More recently, and the focus of today's podcast, Steve is the founder and CEO of a company called CureWise. That's CureWise, WISE, CureWise. It's an AI powered platform that helps cancer patients. And we're going to spend the next few minutes really diving into that. Steve, before we jump in, this is a very, very real and personal issue for you. And I was wondering if you could just let folks know why and how you got personally interested in the use of AI to assist people with cancer.
Well, I am patient zero for my application. I did it for myself because I got a pretty scary diagnosis with a lot of uncertainties and things I needed to figure out. But I have a background in doing medical technology and software. That was the first thing I did after I studied physics and computer science at Stanford. And when I went into the entrepreneurial world of Silicon Valley, it was I was looking for the biggest problem in the biggest industry, and of course, the biggest field is healthcare, and the biggest challenge we have is chronic disease and the fact that we deal with problems when they become much more complicated and expensive rather than dealing with things earlier. But I was always working on somebody else's problem. I left healthcare. I was sort of frustrated by the snail's pace of development in healthcare. I went into other kinds of technology and then eventually became a documentary filmmaker. I got back into AI when I got my OpenAI API key and started playing with it and realizing, okay, this time it's different. There's something fundamentally different about where things were going. And I was very excited about what was happening in AI. And I dove right in a few years ago, working on education. Doing pretty substantial projects. Even like a year and a half ago, I did a couple of keynotes at the Abundance 360 conference and another one in Riyadh, and doing demos where I was using AI in education to bring great thinkers to life and to allow you to explore big ideas with AI in a very personal way. But then I got diagnosed with a rare blood cancer related to multiple myeloma. I started turning all of that kind of effort and experience that I'd gained in working with AI to looking at my own situation and seeing if I could make more sense of it.
And Steve, you and I have spoken actually a few times leading up to this interview. I just find what you're doing beyond compelling. And in fact, we're talking about the issue of cancer. I was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. I was shocked to discover that 18% of Americans, 18%, almost one out of every five people, is living with cancer, which is a shocking statistic. I almost feel like I have to double check it, but they were very, very clear in this Wall Street Journal article about the prevalence. And part of the reason that there's such a high percentage of people with cancer is that people are actually living longer with cancers that had a high mortality before. The medications and treatments are allowing people to live almost cancer as a chronic disease. With your story, though, the thing when I remember when you first told me your story, your diagnosis, was that it took a long time for them to actually make the diagnosis, and you were sick for quite some time.
So I think this is fairly common in cancer that the initial signals are maybe a little vague and maybe feel like they get kind of brushed off. And in my case, I was being misdiagnosed for probably about a year. I knew something was going on, and I was having lots of tests. And but cancer is something that it might be lingering for a while, and then it's like it might be growing exponentially, but that exponential curve looks flat for a long time until it looks like it's going vertical. So, I have something that probably was smoldering for a while, and then whether it was because of a pretty stressful year last year where I was working probably 60, 70 hours a week on AI educational projects, or a specific educational project in AI that had gotten kind of stressful. But there may be triggers where things that kind of escalate. The
Yeah.
challenge with cancer is that every cancer is different. If a million people get the same variant of COVID, that's a million people that have got the exact same pathogen. But if a million people get cancer, that's a million different genetically unique malignancies that have never been seen before on this planet. So, we lump them together in groups, and then we treat them with, relatively blunt instruments of chemotherapy that
Mhm.
actually have a lot of collateral damage and kill a lot of good things along with the bad. And that's, been the challenge of cancer. Can we design therapies that kill more of the bad than the good? Um, Ultimately, the solution to cancer is higher and higher precision, figuring out how to just hit the cancer, whether it's
Mm.
just hit the cancer with chemistry, or whether it's teaching your own immune system how to identify the cancer. It's precision medicine is the solution, and the complexity is beyond the scale of the human brain. The complexity of us, the complexity of medical knowledge, is just beyond human scale at this point. So what's really interesting today is we finally have an instrument, we finally have a tool in artificial intelligence that can handle the scale of complexity that we're dealing with. So that's what really got me excited about this field, and actually about going back into the medical field, is that we finally have a tool that can deal with this vast amount of knowledge and this vast amount of data about the most complex thing on the planet, us, and can actually help us apply human knowledge to some
So,
of our greatest human problems.
so Steve, you're an expert here, but most of us are not expert either in cancer or AI or the combination. So what? So what does AI bring to the table that really transforms the diagnosis and treatment of cancer?
So most people, when they get cancer, do become kind of start to become an expert in their cancer because it's life or death, and you want to figure it out. And you want to figure out what are the treatment options and what does this mean and what can I do about it? And cancer is constantly evolving, and there's new treatments. You watch television, like there's ads for these strange named things, like every few minutes, and a lot of them are more and more kind of targeted therapies related to cancer. So we have this thing in this country called the standard of care. If you go to the doctor and you present with a constellation of symptoms and you get a diagnosis, the default treatment you're going to get is, here's the standard of care for you, here's what you've got, here's the standard of care.
Hmm.
Now, the fact is, every cancer is different and every person is different, and it's very possible or even likely that the standard of care might not be the optimal thing for you. And usually the way it works in medicine is like, well, let's do the standard of care, and if that fails, then we'll try one of these new things. In my case, I have a version of a myeloma cancer growing in my bone marrow that is creating kind of toxic proteins that will destroy my organs if I wait too long. And so this idea of like, hey, let's see if the standard of care works, and if that doesn't work, we'll try something else. That could mean that I have heart failure and kidney failure and all kinds of other things. So I was not really willing to kind of accept that. I dug into the specifics and the specific details, which totally look like Greek. You go into my chart, you get your blood test, and you can see some simple things. It says if it's abnormal, high or low or whatever. And then you get biopsies. And every time they do a biopsy now in cancer, they're doing cytogenetics. They're actually looking at the genes of the cancer cell itself. And they're doing a whole report on that. And it looks like Greek. And there's a lot of Greek in it. And it's hard to make heads or tails of what that is. But what I started doing is using AI as a partner to look at all the detail and explain it to me. Like, what does this mean? What's going on? What does it mean that I have, this percentage of my cells have this specific marker, or I have this specific genetic variation of the tumor cell? What does that mean? Is that good or bad? What does this mean? So what I found in looking at all of that is I had specific genetic variants of my cancer that in the literature, which I also found from AI, that there had been a lot of case studies saying that, hey, for this specific variant, there may be some better treatment options, some things that are more targeted, they're going to be more effective for you. And by the way, with that genetic variation, the standard of care is probably going to be less effective for you. So I was, I'd say, very eager to explore that because I want to get the best thing first, not the best thing when the other stuff fails. And I ended up getting on a much more targeted treatment regimen. And it's something that, is off-label, hasn't had full clinical trials, but has had a lot of case studies. What I'm on, actually, there was a doctor at UCSF who had been recruiting for a clinical trial on the combination therapy that I'm on. And then they canceled the trial. And I reached out to him and I said, well, why'd you cancel the trial? I need to know. I mean, I think this is what I need to do. And he said, well, I couldn't get enough patients for the clinical trial.
Wow.
And this is almost, inevitable that this happens as you get closer to precision medicine.
Right.
Things that precisely target what you have.
Right.
That means there's not a big control group anymore. There's not a big group of people to draw on. And ultimately, you get down to super precision. It's N of one. It's just you. It's treating your unique disease. Well, how the heck do you do a clinical trial on that? So it's a different paradigm for how we think about medical knowledge as you get to precision medicine. And AI thrives on this sort of diversity of case studies and information. But our old model for medicine doesn't quite know how to deal with that yet.
So Steve, it kind of in plain terms, your story to me, there were two or three things that really sort of stood out for me. One was that it took months and months before you were diagnosed, and you went to see lots of very, very good physicians,
Mm-hmm.
specialists. And then you were sitting there after you were diagnosed, which took a while. You were sitting there and you literally plugged in your data into an AI model and it spit out the diagnosis. And
Yes.
you're thinking to yourself, oh my God, I wish I had done this like a year ago. I
Yeah.
would have had the diagnosis. So one is its capability to rapidly and accurately diagnose. And the second thing that stood out was that you were given a treatment regimen by, again, these amazingly, good, you have access to some really, really top-notch cancer specialists. And yet when you plugged in your specific information from all the tests and diagnostics, including the genetic testing, et cetera, it the AI came back and said, hey, the stuff that might work in general is not going to be as effective for you. You need this, which was, as you say, off label. It's not even something that would be anyone would have recommended. And it turned out that, in fact, it's been highly effective. This off-label treatment that you discovered through A has been tremendously effective and has really suppressed your cancer. And the third and final thing I'll say that really struck me and stood out was that then you went back to the AI model and you said, hey, are there certain things I need to stay away from or watch out since I'm taking this medication? And it actually gave you advice on the side effects and certain, foods or whatnot that would interact and cause you trouble. So it was actually a diagnostic, a treatment, and a management tool that just
Yes.
transcended anything that any of your specialists offered you. And to me, that really is the story. You've created something that is very, very specific to solving this problem. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how does CureWise work? What have you put together? And
Sure.
how would someone like myself, if I wanted to access it, how would that work?
Yeah. So just on the very first part, you're saying that there are people working on things like this for doctors, like open evidence is out there doing this for doctors, but I'm saying I'm doing this for patients.
Mhm.
And AI is going to make everybody smarter, and it's going to make doctors smarter because the knowledge is beyond the human scale. So it's going to help people be smarter and get there faster. And it's also going to help patients advocate for themselves and understand and have better conversations with their doctors. So I'm focusing on the patient. Now you can go to ChatGPT and you can ask questions and you can upload things and you can probably learn a lot and get a lot of value in that. Um, I've noticed actually with respect to medicine that GPT-5 is worse than GPT 4.1 when it comes to
Wow.
medical diagnosis in my case. So,
Hmm.
my point there is that depending on how you ask the question and depending on which model you ask and depending on the context, you might get very different answers, which is a little bit disconcerting.
Hmm.
If it's a medical thing and depending on how you ask the question, you get a different answer. So I looked at that and I said, well, how do we flip the script on this idea? The knowledge is in there, but depending on how you set it up and how you ask the question, you might get a different answer. That sounds a little bit scary. Well, if you had an advisory board, you actually would want a lot of different perspectives because it's a way of covering each other's blind spots.
Hmm.
So I said, well, let's make a medical advisory board with many different perspectives and let's have them all look at my data and talk to each other and kind of argue with each other and sort that out. So right now there are 36 different medical agents with 36 different points of view. And when they all look at your medical record and you ask questions in different ways, and you kind of do that in parallel and then synthesize that, you find that when they start to converge, you found something that you really ought to pay attention to. If one of them's off in a direction and everybody else kind of looks at that answer and says, yeah, I don't know, that maybe there's some creative idea there that's still worth looking into, but generally when you find convergence from different points of views, you're getting to this sort of nugget of knowledge that you're looking for. So imagine AI has compressed all of human knowledge from all of history and everything that's ever been written into this black box called an AI, trillion parameter neural network. It's all in there.
Hmm.
But just because it's in there doesn't mean you're going to get exactly the thing that applies to your situation at that time. You might
So,
get different answers.
so
So
Steve,
it's a way of
yeah,
mining the knowledge and applying it and finding the
right.
things to
So
pay
Steve,
attention to.
yeah, so Steve, this so this is amazing. So you've taken that sort of divergence of AI and said it's not a weakness, it's actually a strength. And you've created multiple agents, as you call them. Now, just to be clear, these aren't real experts or clinicians. These are AI made up agents. So
Yeah,
you might have like a cardiologist and endocrinologist and different cancer specialists and a neurologist. And so these are different points of view that the machine has created agents, clinical expert agents. And each one of them goes in and sifts through the data through that specific lens
yes,
and comes up with an opinion. So you've got literally a artificial intelligence advisory board that you've created. And as you're saying, they're going to have different perspectives, but when they start to agree on something, there's that convergence. Then you're like, aha, that's probably more likely true than the one that's, off. What is this called? This I had not heard of this approach, this tool, this methodology of multiple agents. Is there a name for it? You didn't make it up, did you?
well, I mean, I'm the first one I know about that started doing this chain of debate, having different agents not
Chain of
talk to
debate.
me, but talk to each other. I demonstrated that a couple of years ago at Peter Diamandis' Abundance 360 conference. Or actually 2.5 years ago, I had like an optimist and a pessimist argue against each other. And then I did it 18 months ago at the conference where I had multiple agents talking to each other and arguing with each other. And the whole purpose was to explore new knowledge. And I think pretty much everybody who's used ChatGPT a lot has had experiences where they ask for something, they get a response, and then they say, no, that's not right. You say to it, you say, what about this? and then it comes back and says, "Oh yeah, you're right. That is a good idea." So what happens is like when you present a good idea to the AI, you're creating a different pathway through the knowledge, and you might unlock some gem in there that didn't come out initially. So
Hmm.
when you create a bunch of different agents with different points of view, you're creating different pathways through the knowledge, different ways of covering each other's blind spots. And then when they talk to each other, this chain of debate is uncovering new ideas. It's uncovering new connections that didn't come out on the first pass. So I think this is a generally great idea that people are exploring now,
Mhm.
in quite depth for reasoning models.
So when I think about CureWise, which you've created, and I compare that to, let's say, just me going on and finding an open AI model of some sort and plugging in a question, one difference, as you pointed out, is that you've created all these agents. So you've created an artificial advisory board. Number two, you're using multiple models,
Mhm.
and so you've built that into CureWise. What else distinguishes and differentiates CureWise from me just or anyone else just going on and asking a question in some sort of model randomly?
Um, so using all the great models, and which are constantly evolving, and a new one comes out, and maybe it's better, maybe it's worse. It's, how do you know? So using all the models, many different points of view, plus your entire medical record. So there's a kind of a stable context of like
Uh,
who
so
this
you,
is what we're dealing with.
so
So
if
I
I was going to
import.
use yeah, if I was going to use CureWise, it wouldn't just be a question, it would be importing my medical record
Yeah,
into
you mean right now you need to export it and then import it. But these will become automated. But essentially, you need to get your medical data in there so it knows who you are.
So Steve, we have to bring this to a close, and I would love to have you on again as CureWise advances. Question: if someone has cancer or has a loved one or a friend with cancer, how would they access CureWise? What would they do?
So right now it's in a private beta. You can get on the waiting list, and we may be able to invite you in privately. A public launch we're planning for October. Get on the waiting list. Go to curewise.com and get on the waiting list, and you'll have a kind of special early access to it when we do launch it. But it's in very rapid development and testing right now, and there are people that are using it, but it's a more kind of controlled environment right now in a private beta. But it's coming out very soon, and I want to get it out as soon as possible.
And just to be clear, if someone goes on and uses it, you're not recommending that they go around the healthcare system, but they actually bring this information back to their doctors.
Oh, every interaction with it says, "Here's what you should talk to your doctor about." Like,
Perfect.
and then you kind of I use it to rehearse conversations with my doctor.
Wow.
Like, let me educate myself. Let me have the conversation. Let me figure things out. So if you only get 10 minutes with your doctor, how do you make every one of those minutes count? Well, the more knowledgeable you are,
Hmm.
and educated you are about what's going on, the more you're going to the more you're going to get out of that time. You don't want to waste that time,
Mhm.
doing stupid things. You want to get to the point, and this helps you greatly. And you do get to rehearse those conversations. You get to spend hours and hours and hours with simulated medical agents talking about, asking questions, understanding what things mean, and helping you tee up that conversation, helping you have that a better conversation.
Steve, this is, from my perspective, one of the best applications I've heard to date of use of AI in medicine and clinical care. Just so grateful to you for taking what, your own cancer story and, really making it into a just an incredibly positive one. That's sounds to me it's going to help millions and millions of people. And just so grateful to you. So thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. And I definitely want to follow up in 2 or 3 months once it's actually launched.